Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Hamid Elamir, and I am the host of Podcast with Dr. E. At this podcast, I sit with the world's experts in health, education, and community development to talk about current health challenges and ask them to share their experience, knowledge, and insights with all nations across the world so that we can learn from experts across the globe. Today, I have Dr. Sam Shay on the show. Welcome, Dr. Sam.
Thanks. Thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Dr. Sam Shay, DC, IFMCP, helps entrepreneurs and mompreneurs framework their expertise so they can scale their message and impact in the world and achieve personal financial freedom. Dr. Shay also coaches biohackers, entrepreneurs, and mompreneurs using advanced functional testing and genetic testing to increase energy, resilience, and creativity. Dr. Shay also does stand-up comedy as a hobby and also a fun educational vehicle. I am sure that today's show will be very interesting for myself and for the audience. Thank you for your time, Dr. Shay.
Thanks, Dr. Hamid. I'm glad you're here. And full disclosure, I love chatting and educating. And sometimes I kind of go on a roll. And if at any time you interrupt me, I see a guitar in the corner there, just hit a minor chord to interrupt me or point at it or something. And I'll know to reel it back a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah, so well, most of the time, thanks for mentioning that. Most of the time, the guest speakers are, pretty much good on keeping the time, in mind. But I'll be just probably pointing. If each time I pick up the guitar, that'll be a little time consuming. So I'll be just pointing. When I point to the guitar, that's like, okay.
Well, you have a backup. If you start getting out of your chair to grab the guitar, that's a much bigger visual cue than you're pointing at it. So I'll just you can escalate as needed. How's that?
Nice, we'll be fine. So let's get started with the very first question, which is kind of like personal question I asked the guest speakers, and that is your why. And could you please tell us why you do what you do?
Sure. I make no secret about my background story when I'm interviewed. First off, I came from a family of doctors. Both my parents are doctors. My grandfather was a very famous doctor. He was the founding director of the Fels Cancer Research Center at Temple University, published over 300 articles. And my father published 2 books, is a MacArthur Fellow in the field of moral injury and PTSD. And I thought I was going to be a medical doctor, but what happened was that at 6 years old, my parents had what I call a nuclear divorce, and me and my sisters were caught in the blast radius. And it was a terrible, terrible divorce. And on top of that, there was a lot of bullying and humiliation and a fair bit of violence at school. And so I had an emotional war zone at home and a physical war zone at school, which led me to starting at age 6, to develop severe crippling insomnia for over 12 years, or about 12 years, a sugar addiction, screen and video game addiction, terrible digestive problems, embarrassing ones, low mood, depression, anxiety, a lot of physical pain from the untreated injuries from school, as well as terrible posture from sitting at desks all day and then in front of television and video games the other parts of the day. And there's a bunch of other stuff that I just had that was kind of low grade unwellness that all synergized and synthesized together without any overt glaring pathology, because both my parents were medical doctors. So they were looking for overt pathologies, not kind of diffuse, multiple triangulating issues all converging together. And I was basically told it's in my head and to get on psychiatric medication as opposed to deal with root cause. And I had made a decision as a teenager to, I've got to fix this myself or I'm just going to quit. And I discovered natural medicine as a teenager, and that basically changed the trajectory of my life, where I saw that I can actually change my physiology, change my physicality, change my brain, change my biochemistry, as opposed to being informed that it was, bad luck or bad genes or bad, just I have bad mood and only drugs are the way to make me numb out so I wouldn't be basically a bother to other people. And from that, I just studied everything I possibly could. I went, and I just want to be clear to the listeners, like, I'm not bagging Western medicine. I just think like it was misapplied in my particular case. I just want to make that very clear.
Right.
Western medicine and natural medicine can get along. In fact, I think functional medicine is that bridge point between natural and Western. Right. And to give a context for both the lay public as well as the clinicians listening, Western medicine was primarily born out of military medicine, where, triage, where the symptom was the problem. Like, you didn't have on the battlefield, you didn't have missing arm disease or bleeding eye syndrome. You had acute emergencies that need to be stabilized. The issue with Western medicine, where it goes too far, is that it globalized and catastrophized everything into an emergency. And if it's not bad enough to be an emergency, then it's all in your head, take a drug in a psychiatric, and natural medicine had all the brilliant lifestyle interventions in order to help people be preventive and to not only prevent from getting sick, but also become optimal. And the challenge with natural medicine is we didn't always have all the scientific analytical toys and tools to be able to really get targeted. And so the bridge is functional medicine. Where I define it as the best of Western medicine diagnostics with the best of natural medicine, lifestyle, and nutrition interventions. And to me, Western medicine's real gift is emergency care. True, absolute gift. If they're like the fire department, if they get there in time and don't screw up, you can save the life of the house, but there's not that many tools in natural medicine for true emergencies. There are a couple, but it's very specific to this particular emergency. And
Dr. I have to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
I wanted to point to the guitar, but I do have a question about the the role of functional medicine, which when it comes to how you integrate functional medicine into conventional medicine. Later on, I'll be definitely asking you that question specifically so that the audience can learn more about it, and how important it is, especially for clinicians and doctors and healthcare providers, to integrate all these amazing branches of medicine into conventional medicine. But again, going back to just summarize the motivation behind your why is actually basically that you have experienced something, and then that led into researching and studying more about how can you get out of that situation.
Including two addictions. Like, I was addicted to sugar, I was addicted to video games, and right now the big why is I went through a tremendous amount of suffering as a child, just dealing with all of this stuff and not having really meaningful, effective support for the first 12 years. And so by gathering all these different tools and degrees and trainings, whether it's becoming a doctor of chiropractic, got a degree in acupuncture when I lived in New Zealand, becoming a IFMCP, to unpack that little word salad, Institute for Functional Medicine Certified Practitioner. So IFM.org is the main institution. I'm also a certified Kalish practitioner for the Kalish Institute for Functional Medicine. I used to be a functional neurologist with the American College of Chiropractic Neurology. And I had to study and I've been studying naturopathic nutrition for over 20 years. And I basically had to learn all these different fields, and now also genetics in the past 6 years, because I found that for people who are struggling chronically, and also for people who are trying to be optimal, like biohackers or life extension enthusiasts or whatever, human potential, whatever you want to call themselves, entrepreneurs, there's what I found 10 major components that go into health, not one or two. And I was chasing magic bullets trying to get better. And I launched into teaching because I saw that people become, magic bullet therapists, whether it's, what's the latest goji berry juice to squirt up your nose, or the latest fasting technique, or the latest breathing technique, or the latest diet or nootropic, or whatever thing that people hear on a podcast, read in a book, see on a television show, or read in a magazine, that it all sounds really great and wonderful and amazing and effective, and everyone needs this now. It's magic bullet therapy. And I came up with the 10 pillars of health
Yeah.
and are
So
teaching it.
could you please tell us about that? Because I was reading also about the 10 pillars of health on your website, and as we know, like we first made also in the Mindshare, one of the events that, for healthcare providers, and it was amazing that when I read about you and your bio also, the you're helping entrepreneurs and mompreneurs, which is a new word also for
All right.
a great one, to framework. And also you do have amazing contents for laypersons as well as for professionals. And can you just please tell us a little more about the 10 pillars of health and what is it exactly? Just break it down for us and
Sure.
the
So
audience.
if you could enable sharing, I think then
Yeah, I think
I'll actually put up on screen. If people are just listening, I'll be able to explain it. But if people are
Okay,
watching the video,
great.
I'll have a visual for people.
Okay, you can try it now.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. All right.
Nice.
So, so there's a lot of converging things that we're discussing all at once. So, like the intersection of like how I came to this model was a combination of my personal journey and also working with clients, particularly those that were severely unwell, like in chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, autoimmune, hormone dysregulation, and stubborn weight gain that wouldn't go away, usually in the same person. And what I found was that when I reflected on my own past, and I looked at also the chronic people I was working with who were suffering chronically, they had 10 specific areas or pillars of health that they were struggling. And the real observation after just reviewing all these cases was that the people who were struggling the most had a minimum 7 out of 10 pillars crumbling, which explained why the magic bullet therapy wasn't working. Because a lot of these people would go from one product to one protocol to one practitioner to the next and not get lasting results that they wanted. Because if you're sitting on 7 tacks and you remove 2 of them, you're technically healthier, but you don't feel any better. And you're certainly not all the way better. So most clinicians really specialize in 1 to 3 pillars, like really well, and are good at another 3 and not so much with the other 4. And which 3, and which 4 varies wildly between practitioners. So if someone's got 7 or more that are pillars that are crumbling, then they're going to be struggling. And then also for the people who are the aspirational biohacker, entrepreneur, human potential, etc., they get so fixated on 1 or 2 pillars, like really hyper-focused. And it's the same 80-20 principle. Like they're putting 80% of their effort into something, 1 pillar, when they really need to find the pillar that's the weakest and spend most of their time building that up. So I found the model works for whether someone's chronically unwell to someone who's aspirational and so they live in optimal health. So the 10 pillars are brain and hormones, brain, bowel, body, burst, biotoxins, bionutrients, breakfast, bothers, bugs, and bedtime. Those are the 10. You'll notice the alliteration. And alliteration is one of the methods of frameworking. And
it's amazing that how you just came up with all of them starting with B, which makes it the 10 Bs, and that's very great way to remember.
Well, it was the 10 S's, but one of the S words was a little controversial. So brain was synapse, bedtime was sleep, bugs was symbiosis, bothers was stressors, breakfast was starting meal, bionutrients was sustenance, biotoxins was synthetics, burst was speed training, body was structure, and bowel was... I did that in a conference full of medical doctors and naturopaths, and someone from the audience blurted out the 4-letter S word, in a big question mark inflection, and the whole room just burst out laughing because I laid the trap, and she just walked right into it. Right. So I went with the B option. So as a teacher, like I really want to make the model inviting and easy to grasp and memorable. So you'll see, in terms of frameworking, there's alliteration, there's numbers, the 10 of this, the 7 of that, the 5 of this, whatever it may be. Right. There's colors involved, there's geometry involved. It's combining multiple framework styles together, which I'll get into more. There's 6 specific frameworks. Something I love doing for clinicians, and also for anyone else out there who's an entrepreneur,
Right.
I have a gift for taking knowledge and synthesizing it, sifting through it, and repackaging it as a usable framework. And so I love doing it, and it comes naturally to me. So I framework other people's content to scale their impact and their income.
Right.
Special focus in health entrepreneurs, because that's my main area of expertise.
Right.
But I've done it for other fields, whether it's a singer, a psychologist, a martial artist. I've done it for some other people as well. And the reason why I made this framework is because, one, it helps me think as a clinician. It also helps my clients take their own power, like they become empowered in their own health journey, because now they can see, oh, I've done too much of this and not enough focus on that. Or I see, oh, this is where this happened and this is where that didn't happen. So for example, like in these 10 pillars, we've got brain and hormones. So that's adrenal, thyroid, and estrogen toxicity or estrogen dominance is the three main issues we look at. Bowel, the second pillar. By the way, that's also my hidden sense of humor. Number 2 for bowel, going number 2. So yeah, little nerd joke snuck in there into the visual framework. Bowel is about digestion and elimination. And the best supplement on the planet, I'll tell you right now, the number 1 best supplement ever I found across all people, across all time, in all situation, is chewing. Chewing right. Is the best supplement. Why? Because it helps you absorb all the food you've eaten more and helps improve your digestion. Like chewing is bar none the best supplement you can have.
Right.
And I know that may sound really simplistic, but you have to understand, like I practice in New Zealand, and there wasn't a lot of access to all the fancy toys, etc., that you could have in a lot of health practices. So I had to learn how to MacGyver, a lot of these things to help people just be able to get better as quickly as possible. It may sound real simple, but people don't. What's that Simpson line? Like Homer Simpson, he eats like a pig, and Lenny corrects him. Actually, he eats more like a duck. Pigs tend to chew. And he cuts to an image of Homer just like swallowing a whole sandwich whole without even, like a duck with his head lifted up. Anyway, so bowel and digestion. Remember, I had very bad bowel and digestive problems growing up. So that was a real, I'm one of the few docs that's happy to talk about people's bowel functions. Physical body and structure. This is head injuries, spinal misalignments, poor posture, untreated accidents, bad dental work, as well as genetics. Now, the reason I put genetics in body is because of the phenomenon called identical twins. They have the same body because they have the same genes. So I do advanced genetics analysis called functional genetics, where I look at patterns, not chase after specific individual genes. That's a whole separate discussion. And I have a new ebook out that I just published on my website on that. If people want to know about genetics, they can just go to my website, drsamshay.com, and they can find access. They can just get free access to that, as well as the other ebook on biohacking and the 10 pillars of health that will have this 10 pillars model more fleshed out. So genetics is in body. Burst is burst exercise and movement. Now, exercise can be a dirty word or a trigger word to some people, so I prefer to use the word movement. And duration, consistency, variety, type, quality, intensity. Like there's all sorts of different things for movement. Not a big fan of jogging or marathoning, rather. In fact, I have an article on my blog, diplomatically entitled "Why Marathoners Look Like Cancer Patients." And I grew up outside Heartbreak Hill, and I can watch all these marathoners jog by looking gaunt, looking awful. And there's reasons for that, having to do with excessive cortisol dumping, eroding away muscular tissue, scavenging for fuel. But people can read about that on the article. So I'm a big fan of walking and movement, and as well as high intensity interval training. And there's specific ways to do high intensity interval training safely. So fifth pillar, biotoxins.
Okay, that encompasses if you break it down also for people who are, audience who are just listening and not seeing the video, basically you divided the whole framework into 3 major parts, right? Which is the physical part, biochemical, and then the mental and emotional, which is now you just covered the part which was the physical part.
Bowel, body, and burst exercise. Poop, your structure, and movement. That's physical. Biochemical will break down into biotoxins, which is everything toxic for you, synthetics, off-gassing petrochemicals, heavy metals. Gluten is a major toxin for a lot of people, things that what you breathe, things in the water, everything that's toxic for you that weakens you. And bionutrients is everything you need to sustain life. So that's not just minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, and so on. It's actually also sunlight and oxygen, because you metabolize those also. Breakfast is, I found that in clinically, the 99% of my chronically ill patients and clients had terrible breakfast. And that was my first ebook, was on breakfast. And I know there's, it's very faddish right now to skip breakfast because you're intermittent fasting. I really would rather people skip dinner and not skip breakfast, because your cortisol levels keep going up unless you eat in the morning. And I would rather you eat a solid breakfast and skip dinner. And breakfast is also a bookmark for morning and evening routines, because a lot of people who are unwell don't have really solid morning and evening routines. And the most unhealthy class of clients I've ever worked with as a profession have been night shift nurses, like the most unhealthy. And they've got all these 10 pillars in spades, but the one that's just throws everything off by a full log, like just a full standard deviation, just off, is that their rhythms and routines are totally all over the place, because their schedules are just Tetris together, day to day, week to week. So routine is very, very important. I wouldn't wish nighttime nursing upon anybody, because it's just so destructive in the long term. Bothers is the 8th pillar, now in the mental emotional. That's stressors of all types: financial, emotional, marital, relationships. Watching the news is a stressor. Clutter, that's why Marie Kondo and the life-changing magic of tidying up is very popular. All types of stressors. Electromagnetic fields for certain people are bundled in this as well. Community stress or lack of community, loneliness, isolation, the social stressors that people experience. That's pillar number 8. Pillar 9 is bugs or hidden infections. So that's hidden infections in the gut. Doesn't matter if you're in a Western country. I've done, I don't know how many hundreds of stool tests, hundreds and hundreds. Like, people can get hidden infections in their gut. There's also mold, which is an external infection coming in. This is when I was in New Zealand, was mold central. You're a tiny island surrounded by a lot of water and bad construction. There's mold everywhere. And I put bugs in the mental emotional because people's brain and moods change when they have an infection. And I didn't put bugs with bowel because of the mold phenomenon, because it was an infection coming in from the outside, not just something that housed in the gut. Bedtime is, of course, the last pillar, being sleep. So quality, duration, consistency, depth. So that's the 10 pillars of health. And this is what I do clinically, is that when I work with clients, I analyze their 10 pillars, and the very long, health survey intake is broken up intentionally into these 10 pillars. So it's self-educational also for the person going through it, that they can see what falls under what pillar. Now, the way this relates back to what, if you're a lay public or a clinician, remember, whatever you've learned in the past about health, whatever you're learning now, whatever you will learn into the future, you can now contextualize and slot into each one of these pillars appropriately. So you're no longer going to risk becoming a goji berry fanatic. Like, that's gone. Goji berries will land quite nicely in the bionutrients pillar. And you can see how people become a fanatic over goji berry juice. They get stuck there. Now, it can work for some people if all 9 of their other pillars were like at 70+%, but their bionutrients that happen to be the specific nutrients that were in goji berry juice they're like 30%, they take their goji berry juice, suddenly they feel amazing because they brought the one pillar that was really low up to meet the other ones, and they feel great. Then they start build a business around goji berry juice, and they think it's the one true magic health way and so you can see why the magic bullet therapy enthusiasts really, they're being authentic. But for people who have multiple pillars, particularly 7 or more that are crumbling, it's not going to work unless it's in synergy with all these other things. Now, one thing else about creating a framework is that you start to see patterns within patterns. So there are 4 pillars here that actually can be sledgehammered, not just crumble over time. So by sledgehammer, I was sitting in neurology class in chiropractic school, and one of my instructors did a lot of litigation work as an expert witness. And he said in major car accidents, the insurance companies want to settle as quickly as possible because the major onset of symptoms happen about 2 years after the fact, because your body's used up all of its nutrition to fight the inflammation and the other damage. And then you're left basically nutritionally void, and suddenly all the weird stuff starts showing up. And I sat in class, it's literally 2005. I sat in class as he was saying this, if that's true for a physical head-on collision, I wonder if that's true for a chemical head-on collision or an emotional head-on collision as well. Not only was that true, vetted in practice, but it's also an infectious head-on collision. So pillar number 3, physical, which is the car accidents, violence, sports injuries, that can be a sledgehammer. Pillar number 5, biotoxins. That could be a chemical sledgehammer. You're exposed to heavy petrochemicals, oil fields. I have clients who worked in oil fields or on rigs, major pesticide exposure, whatever it may be, if they're uniquely vulnerable to it, heavy metals, whatever. That can be a sledgehammer. Bothers, you get a legal notice, you get a divorce, your child gets sick or dies, or a parent dies, or you get fired, or something happens in the world. And then bugs, saw it over and over again. People would get sick, and then a couple months they'd recover, and then a couple months later they develop chronic fatigue fibromyalgia symptoms. And what happened was that when I look at someone who's chronically unwell, I look for these 4 sledgehammers within 2 years of the onset of their chronic issues. Mm-hmm. Did they have a major accident, a chemical exposure, a major stressor, or an infection within 2 years of the onset of their chronic issues, with the background of 5, 6, 7 other pillars crumbling, also in the background? So it finally, pieces started coming together. And this is one of the benefits of having a framework, because one, I could explain it to a client really easily. See how you get all these things based, and then you had this 1 or 2 events, and then within 2 years, and it's like it maps on almost always. So this is the value of the framework.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Sam, for mentioning that, and especially sharing this screen for people who are, watching the video. It's the visual, as it's, the expression goes, like, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And the way that you put it, it's really interesting that, you broke it down into chunks, and then 3 different parts, and then all those letters starting with the same letter, all those words, and makes it a lot easier for people to remember. And it also reminds me of my medical school when I was trying to make some acronyms of definitions and things of the things. So you mentioned about these things, and when you were talking about the breakfast, considering the time into consideration, we only have like another 10 minutes. I do have a whole bunch of questions to want to ask you, but I wanted to also jump on your background in comedy, which is really interesting, especially when it comes to medical field, which is really a kind of very serious profession. But how can you ended that? But before that, I just wanted to mention that culturally also, things that happen in people's lives culturally affects their health. For example, in many of the eastern part of the world, like, eastern countries, the breakfast, as you just mentioned, that dinner is actually a bigger meal of the day. And the reason behind that is a lot of people would be ignoring the breakfast or not having enough nutrients and, quality food in the breakfast, but they will be having everything heavy in the dinner time because, people, members of the family, especially who are working, would be all coming back home, getting around the table and having that. But just, if you can exit from the
let me just kind of speak to that real quick. So that there's always a interplay between what is optimal for biochemical health versus mental emotional health. I'm not an absolutist that people should not have dinner. Like, I have dinner. Like, it's just, if we're talking about ideal versus ordeal, and as if people, to me, it's more important people have social connection, family time, friend time, etc. People come together at dinners
Right.
than it is to be super optimal about, their breakfast and whatnot. And it's
Yeah.
always a balance,
Yeah.
I've had one person who was a marathoner, but he was really depressed, except when he was out there doing his 5Ks. He's outside, he's in the sun, he's with his running buddies. And
Right.
I said, okay, the bigger issue here is your mood. Go do your running, but do these couple things to buttress against some of the damage of long-term jogging might do, like sprint at the end, do these other things, etc. So it's always, as a clinician, you always got to balance the ideal with the ordeal.
Right. Yeah, and directly in line with you, what you just said, I totally agree with you on the, the importance of breakfast. And the reason I mentioned that is because some people do that not even knowing about it, or not having enough information which meal of the day is really important. So
Yeah.
I do agree that the breakfast is the most important, and should be, actually, people and families should focus on that more. And if they have to have, a little heavier, try to not have the heavier dinner. But if so, then it should be a little earlier, like, not
Early, exactly. Yeah, lighter and earlier if you're gonna have dinner.
Exactly.
Correct. I agree with that totally.
All right. So
So
if
comedy. So you want to ask me about the comedy side of it?
absolutely, if you don't have any other screens shared here, I
The
mean,
only other screens to share, just super briefly, is like if people are interested in just if people are wanting to understand the different types of frameworks, and they can just go to myframeworker.com, and that's where they can see the whole presentation on the framework. So there's 6 different types of frameworks, making numbers like 10 pillars of health, the 4 R's to repair leaky gut, the 7 habits of highly effective people, etc. There's alliteration, which we went over, like the 10 B's of the 10 pillars of health, the 4 R's of Dr. Bland's work. Colors, different colors are very useful. Yin yang symbol being one of the most famous
right.
visual color differentiators as a framework out there. There's clustering, so grouping things together, like I did with physical, biochemical, and emotional. And when I look at genetics, I cluster genetics together. I don't seek after one. I look at what's the initiating inflammatory genes, what's the propagating inflammatory genes, what are the extinguishing of inflammation genes. So clustering is another method. Then there's acronyms, which is arguably the hardest one, where in my addiction model called Tame the Beast, because addiction is a beast on your back. And acronyms are the most difficult ones to put together, but they're extremely useful. And the last one is geometry, whether it's a yin yang symbol, a triangle of this, a square of that, the inverted hypotenuse, rhombus, of dodecahedron, goodness, whatever, like geometry is also a part. So those are the 6 major frameworks. Again, people can just go to myframeworker.com and the whole presentation. And from there, I'd say around comedy, I've always loved comedy, but I found that it was invaluable in a clinical setting, because sometimes you have to deliver bad news and or difficult news, and comedy makes it much more palatable. And it also makes you much more relatable and likable. And being likable is actually a clinical imperative for a clinician. And the reason why is that my first bachelor's degree was in psychosomatic medicine. It was a glorified pre-med degree with extra anthropology, extra philosophy, extra psychology, and a couple of odds and ends. And so I've been really interested in the placebo effect for a long time. And there was an article, I think it was New York Times, I think it was early 2019, that described the placebo effect as basically how much you like and trust your doctor. And when that was illustrated, it made total sense, because I've met some truly profoundly mediocre clinicians, just profoundly mediocre, that got disproportionately good results. And that always bothered me. Why are they getting such good results? And every single one of them was so damn likable. They were really, really likable. And then you've got these.
That was actually the question I wanted to ask. Why do you make such an effort to bring humor and comedy into your practice to help your clients? And you just put it. Yeah, please go ahead.
So the placebo effect is how much you like and trust your clinician. And if someone is really likable, every time your client thinks of you, thinks of the recommendation, a diet protocol, a thing to do, a rehab, whatever it is, they're going to feel this like lightness, this kind of lightness and ease of doing it. But, I've met some genius level clinicians whose protocols just glow. I mean, glow. They're amazing.
Right.
And they do not get the results they should because they have the personality of a doorstop or worse. And every time their client would think of them, they get annoyed, frustrated, anxious, worried, and so the client would hit a cortisol tinged glass ceiling of progress. So this is the nocebo effect, is that if the clinician was unlikable or at least blah, the client is going to butt up against a cortisol tinged glass ceiling for their health progress. So becoming likable is a clinical imperative for the benefit of your clients. Become likable. And when I read this article and I had a history of some other comedy, and I was like, you know what? I really have to get back into it. And that's when I signed up for an improv class and a stand-up comedy class again. And I've just been doing it ever since. And, from a business standpoint, so comedy also helps with marketing.
You still do some comedy?
Oh, I do. Yeah. So people can go onto my YouTube. They can put in Dr. Sam Shay. I have like 80 something videos on my YouTube channel. I think 10 of them are comedy clips from my stand-up routine. So for example, I pretend to be David Attenborough narrating a National Geographic special inside a Boulder coffee shop. As the full voice, the actions, the stooped posture, etc. What it's like, how Voldemort from Harry Potter is actually not a supervillain. He's just that mean girl from high school who needs a nose job. The real reason I don't drink alcohol, the real definition of kombucha, etc. So and a couple other things on there. So the comedy is what made my life better, just intrinsically. I like life a lot better, but it also helps my clients a lot.
Great. So, yeah, this is really interesting. It reminds me of the definition of health, but that health is not merely the absence of disease. It's just physical, mental, and social well-being. All the three important parts. And you put it really well in your framework that you described it, and also, just using your background in comedy and making things a little more humorous and interesting for your clients. And as you said, that just being a likable practitioner or health professional for your clients, especially when it comes to this hard time during this pandemic. A lot of people are having a hard time, regardless of some pre-existing conditions, but everybody is somehow suffering from the all the consequences of this pandemic. And being a little more humorous and bringing some humor and likability, if there is a word, into your work is really important, and that makes your day go smoothly as well as your clients. So I totally agree with you, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience and knowledge with us today. I know you have amazing content in your on your website, as well as you on the presentations that I just noticed a lot of amazing slides. We couldn't share them all with the audience because of the time limit, and I do want you to please share your how audience can find you and learn more about your work, and
Sure.
if you have any recommendations for them.
So my main website is drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. That's where you'll find my 3 free ebooks. The one you've got on genetics, on the 10 pillars of health and biohacking, the other on breakfast and adrenal health. I also find information on my addiction models, particularly video game addiction. If people want to work with me personally, there's a contact page to schedule a free 15-minute chat at this time of our recording. And then there's a YouTube channel where I've got over 80 videos, playlists ranging from genetics to mind-body techniques to my comedy playlist, which everyone should go and enjoy and just have a laugh. And then there's specifically to frameworking is myframeworker.com, all one word, myframeworker.com, where I have this 50 plus slide presentation all recorded, and people can get the notes to that presentation as well. If you're interested in frameworking your expertise into a usable model that then you could, trademark, turn into a book, an online course, or even just a minimum, just make your practice a lot smoother and your marketing a lot more straightforward. So there's and there's also, they could put my name, Dr. Sam Shay, into the podcasts and stuff, and things will pop up. The one funny thing about way back in the early days of practice, if people put in my name, my information didn't come up, but a porn star's name came up. So I led to some very awkward phone calls. I'm kidding. So it's good. So if you the more you publish, the less awkwardness is going to happen. So the more you get on the front page of Google of your own name, that's worth doing.
Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Sam, for being with us today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Okay, thanks so much, Dr. Anu.
And dear audience, for more shows and amazing guests to speak about their experience and knowledge and insight, please stay tuned with Dr. E podcast. Thank you all and have a great day.